Well, so everyone, it's great to see you. I know we've had a lot of great presentations today already, and so today I wanted to give, oh, wrong button, my bad, computer. I wanted to give a practical guide to AI governance. So I've been to a lot of different conferences, and they're always like, do this, and it's like, well, what do I do? Tell me the things, right? So I was like, okay, maybe I can help the people. So a little bit about me. My name is Qamar Gebarin. I have lots of fun letters after my name because I am certified in a lot of privacy stuff. I was an IT professional, and I became a data privacy professional on accident because I went to complain to data governance about the data scientists, and they were like, do you want to join data privacy? And I was like, what even is data privacy? Like, what is it? So I wanted to start with a disclaimer. First and foremost, I said AI governance. Now, just in, where did Austin go? He disappeared. So in Austin, oh, there he is. So Austin spoke about lots of different technologies, right? AI, ML, chatbots, neural networks, right? So just to make my life easier, I am saying AI governance and not AI, LLMs, neural networks, all the things with it, right? So I know that you know that I know that you know that we all know that when I say AI, I'm saying that umbrella for all the terms, right? So, and because I work at a corporate job, disclaimer, I am here representing myself, not the opinions of the company or the actions of the company. So everything in here is my own research, my own thoughts, biases, etc. So also, not a lawyer. I don't speak legalese. They never added it to Duolingo. Let's be honest, we only ever complete like 1 or 2 things on Duolingo to begin with, so please consult a lawyer for your specific case. So, why do we even need to govern it, right? We're talking about how cool it is, all the different things it can do. Why do we need to govern it? So, I don't know if y'all remember, but like, what was that, an hour or so ago, we talked about data literacy. So let's add on to that AI literacy, right? So understanding where the data is coming from, how we can use it, what harm can it do, and then also like best case for the business scenarios. So we want to comply with laws and regulations, right? We like our jobs, we like to make money, we want to keep our jobs, we want to keep making the monies. Let's not get in trouble with the government. Data quality and best practices. Say what you will about any AI, LM, whatever models, they will point out data quality issues so fast. They're the first ones to raise their hands about it, first ones to complain about it, the last ones to do anything about it, but first ones to point it out. So another good reason we want to make sure we're bringing data quality discussions into these conversations. So protect your company reputation assets. Again, making some monies, keeping some monies. Ethical standards. Oh, it got in there, Jen. I actually did put ethics in it, right? So we want to minimize harm. So if you are already taking into account ethical considerations from a strategic level of decision making, not just from one-offs of can we do it, it's like, should we be doing it? Should also be the follow-up question. And then overall risk management. So fun fact, regulators are going to be more inclined to want to work with you if they see that you're at least trying to govern your technologies, right? So if they see that you're being like accountable for, okay, we're checking things, we're doing our due diligence, we're vetting our vendors, right? They're going to be asking you for less data, right? And less evidence. So fun, I don't know if any of you are also in the privacy space and also get to learn about different regulations and stuff, so I just wanted to point out a couple of them. So first one's up here, we're talking about the EU AI Act, the Colorado AI Act, right? What these are specifically talking about AI decision-making models, anything that could potentially cause harm to human beings, right? So looking at these, they're basically saying like, okay, this is high risk, medium risk, low risk. Here are things where you should not be using this at all. So EU, Colorado specifically call out like employment data, like in hiring. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that they look at, and then also healthcare in is also called out there as well. So when I think of healthcare, I think of how they were trying to use AI to determine how much anesthesia you would need and like billing of anesthesia based on that. So think of like if myself or a loved one was on like an operating table, I'm like, I don't want AI telling me how much anesthesia I need. I would like the anesthesiologist who's been doing it for years to be like, nah, she needs a little bit more. Keep her asleep. Don't need her waking up in the middle saying you're doing it wrong. So next we have the GDPR California. They have automated decision-making rules. So what that means is those are privacy-specific laws. So talking about the use and processing of personal data and regulating it. And so they have caveats about like, okay, well, if you're going to be using data, let's go ahead and make sure that we're adding this decision-making. So calling out, are you getting consent? So opt-in for Europe, opt-out for California. So the difference between that is like, am I saying, yes, you can do this ahead of time, or am I saying, no, you can't do it after you've already done it, right? So that's the difference between an opt-in versus an opt-out. And then also transparency, like, do you actually know what characteristics are going into the model as it's being designed? Or are you just kind of throwing it into a black box? Y'all know what a black box is. Do not use them, especially when it comes to PII. Please and thank you. Do you actually know? Can you explain to this person why they got rejected for adopting that puppy? We can't tell you, we don't know what goes into it. So Jennifer talked about industry-specific regulations. So if you're looking at HIPAA for health, if you're looking at DOT, Farm Transportation, and then like if you're talking about finance, you got New York DFS. So those will typically just put out a bulletin, right? So if you've ever seen the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, do y'all remember the bulletin? Like, well, you should have made a formal complaint because we put up a bulletin. Who's gonna go look at the bulletin? Nobody, right? So you have to sign up, regular, keep track of it. I suggest if you do work at a bigger company and they have a compliance department, they typically will have a service that will send them like fun emails that say, hey, by the way, this is coming up, see whether or not this like applies to you. So now the last piece is frameworks. So these are groups and organizations that come together and have industry professionals, academic professionals coming in and saying like, these are the best practices, these are the best controls for whatever scenario you're doing, right? So these are free. OECD NIST is here in the US, OECD is kind of global, and then OWASP is of course global, and they're like security and privacy, right? Because they all kind of flow together. So essentially, the biggest part of any governance program is we want to limit risk as much as possible. And so everyone is in charge of at least finding the risk and helping instill controls, or at least listing the controls, right? And so I broke them up into kind of 4 pieces. So you got security, so security, following up. And then you want to make sure access, confidentiality, and integrity, right? That is not my area of expertise. I can say most of y'all understand the concept of encryption, adding passwords, hiding your keys, right? Physical and non-physical. So adding on to that enterprise risk, right? So does it impact the entire company? How do we handle exceptions? Who's high enough of a level to sign off and say, yes, we can take that risk? I understand what it is, I understand the potential for harm, and I'm gonna go ahead and say like, it's worth it if we lose another $3 billion on it, it's fine. It's cool technology, we can do it, right? And then you have model risk, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with if you've developed or played with any of these tools. You've gotten to see like, okay, maybe the accuracy varies when we added this new data set that we just happened to grab from off the interwebs. And then you also have data privacy risk, which, near and dear to my heart, of course, of making sure that we're taking away any identifiable information that could be tied back to a human being and possibly impact them. So, of course, we talk about consent, right? Opt-in, opt-out, notifications, updating when things are changed, and then purpose limitation. So this one, I don't know if people understand it as much. It goes back to the idea of, this is my data, I collected it, I stored it, I've had it for umpteen million years, right? So if you collected it for a specific purpose, ethically and by law, you cannot use it for another purpose. So you do have to send out notification, and you need to get that back from people, right? So, kind of a fun game a little bit. So I like to break up utilization of how we use these tools, right? So what I mean by that is if you're wanting to take models or anything that's already on the world, or you want to build it yourself, you're gonna have it in 3 parts. So first, internally developed, right? So I like to compare this to you and your partner decided to have a child. You had a baby. You know the DNA that came into it. You understand the environment that it's being raised in. You're nurturing it. You're training it. You're watching it grow. You see where it's going, right? Well, then you have your hybrid where you take, let's say, OpenAI. You take it in. You're starting to train it. You're working with it. You might not necessarily know exactly where, the DNA come from, but you do know that you can at least talk to it and make sure that you can train it a little bit as much as you can. Like if there's any habits or anything that's already there, that's going to be really hard to kind of train out. And so you're moving along, but you're still going to be monitoring it and checking it as you go. Well, then we have our externally developed or third-party tools, right? And I like to attribute this to you've adopted a pet, right? It kind of comes as it is. You don't really know what the DNA is that went into creating it. And then there's only so much you can do to train it. You can't really communicate with a dog. Like you can do so much, right? Like you can only be like, let me explain to you art of war to a dog. Like they're just kind of look at you and just smile and be like, yes, I love you. Exactly like speaking English or speaking French, right? They're just gonna smile and nod. So I would like everyone to raise your hand if you know somebody who would go ahead and like take a technology and bring it in like without having it vetted, just to be like, let's see what it's gonna do. Like it's fine. Like let's see what it's gonna do. Okay, now raise your hand if you know somebody who would 100% try to domesticate a raccoon. All right, all y'all should raise your hand because myself and Jennifer would 100% try to domesticate a raccoon. And I showed this photo to my daughter this morning. My daughter is 14, and she was like, we should totally adopt a raccoon. Like, I kid you not, she 100% said that. And I was like, you are my baby. Yeah. So how does that apply to what we're doing or what we're trying to do? So I found this handy-dandy little diagram, and it's talking about the different pieces of, DevOps, right? The different steps. Hopefully you're doing most of these, if not all of these, at least the testing. Okay. So, all right, you're going into the hybrid, right? So you might not really be building, okay? And you buy another tool and there's like no code or having to do is just drag and drop. Okay, so no coding really, right? And then it goes on to, you're not deploying it, the vendor's doing everything, you're just kind of modifying it. And then you're not doing anything to update the releases. And then maybe you're not even monitoring it. You just get an email that says, hey, here's your report, right? And then maybe at some point you're just not even doing any testing. You're like, we trust it, it's good. So that all to say, depending on whether it's a hybrid, whether it's internally developed, externally developed, the considerations that go into governance will change. The steps that you take will change. So everybody, you have to take a look at it just like all of us, if we have children, if we have pets, they're all different. How we treat them is not necessarily going to be equal, but it should be equitable, right? So the fun part, if you will, of why this is actually practical for you. So this is what you're going to need for a good compliance program, right? A good governance program. These are all the components, right? So ideally, you already have a lot of this in place. So these are the things you should already have in place. Leverage these, just add on to it, right? Make your life easier. Add AI questions, add elements that you can just have those guardrails to say like, okay, here we have in our change management tool, we have some AI. Let's go ahead and add these questions, right? Let's add these 5 questions, 10 questions. Ideally not 200 questions, like, y'all, it's normally not that deep, but to each his own. So these are the AI specific ones I wanted to highlight. And I will share these on LinkedIn. So everyone can see them as well. So let's go ahead and talk about the people, right? So an AI council and committee. So these are people who have a good standing in the company, they have business experience, they have hopefully some authority in decision making, that they can say like, yes, this would be great for the company, no, this would not be great for the company, right? And can help determine whether or not ROI is actually realistic. And then AI experts. So these are the people like you, most of you, who know the different types of technology, who understand how the different implementations, and then can actually help you assess and evaluate whether or not it's worthy of a good try. And then AI champions. So I love a good champion program. Woohoo! So these are people who are everywhere in the business at different levels, who can help you get the change in the organization. Also help ensure that correct governance is being put in place. And then also, just a shout out, a t-shirt goes a long way to help bring people on board to be champions. So if you want to start a champion program, everybody loves a t-shirt and a water bottle. I don't get the obsession with everybody wanting a water bottle, but it is a thing. Okay. So documentation, which is fun. Everybody loves documentation. I know, I am one of those people who loves it and hates it all at the same time. I love it until somebody asks me where it is and I'm like, oh, hang on. So an AI specific policy. So really what this does is it lays out the rules for your company and your organization of how you're gonna be using, deploying, approving AI and all those fun things. So make it easy for your employees to have a good reference of like where to go if they're curious about how do we even get started. An AI inventory. So back to talking about how regulators will be helpful if you have documentation. If you have an AI inventory and you can show them, here it is, here are the things we assess. We take a look and see whether or not, it's a third party, if it's a hybrid tool, what type of integration, right? All those fun things. This can be as specific or vague as you'd like it to be and give it a little bit more variation. And so if they see that you're already taking notice and that you have things that you've approved and things that you've rejected, right, and you can show that there is an actual valid process of approving things, then they're less likely to be like, show us everything. Show us all the documentation about your deployment. Show us how you're like monitoring it. How do you know? How did you calculate for bias? Like it kind of varies that way, right? So AI contract language is super fun, right? Because it kind of goes into the third party realm, which honestly, vendor risk management in and of itself could be a whole day worth of talking about how you want to govern that properly. So for right now, most of the time, you're going to use your contract language to help protect you and the company. So what that does is says, okay, what data are we sending? How long are you allowed to keep it? What can you process? Well, you will delete it when we ask you to delete it. And then also like who's in charge if there is a data incident or a data breach, right? So as most of you know or should know, that a data breach isn't if it'll happen, it's when it will happen, right? Just like we can't keep up with the technology, the hackers are good. They does a good job and, don't make it easy for them. So adding contract language there. And then also if you can add a caveat that says if you reject a piece of AI technology. So for example, if you use Microsoft and you're like, we don't want Copilot. We don't know what you're doing with it yet. We don't trust it yet. So if you want to set that as a standard, you want them to be able to show you, okay, give me evidence that when I say don't use Copilot, make sure that it's turned off and make sure that nobody can turn it on unless we give them permission to, right? So have that contingency in your contract. And then an AI incident response plan. So I think everybody should be doing tabletops. So if you're not familiar, a tabletop is basically just an exercise where you have a scenario of a data breach or a data incident and everybody goes through the response plan to see how effective it is and how effective communication and all of that goes. So these I like to compare to your airplane takeoff safety instructions, right? Like you don't want the plane to land, but you know where the oxygen mask comes from, you know where your life jacket is, all that fun stuff, you know where the emergency exits are. So, going on to evaluation. So if you're already doing impact assessments, DPIA, PIAs, then you can just add a question of, are you using AI? Yes, okay, cool. Here's 5 more questions. Here's 20 more questions. Whatever y'all want to do. It's your assessment. You do you. And then I highlighted internal audit review. So this is for your overall AI program. So if you are a publicly traded company, you're going to have an internal audit, making sure that CFO doesn't get arrested, right? I mean, they're making sure that anything or any data or any processing that hits the financial statements is legit and calculated and that there's controls in place. Similar with this, they're going to be making sure that all the people who say they're doing the things that are all listed here are actually doing the things. And then they typically will report that to an audit committee saying like, hey, so-and-so over there in third-party risk is not actually adding the AI contract when AI tools are coming in, right? So they are snitches. That is kind of their job, but they also keep your jobs and they help you out. So it's a necessity. All right, and then AI-specific training. So here, not necessarily like how to use AI and how to get the tools, kind of all the fun presentations we're hearing today, more so on how do we use it in the program, how do we actually get to implement any new tools, and then also like how do they become champions. So any controls that can be put in place to help make sure that AI is safe and is causing less harm and we're being ethical and responsible is always going to be good for everybody overall across the board. Let me see. Am I going the right way? Did I do the thing? Oh my God, I did the thing. Okay, so of course I want to give you all the option because you have free choice. So what happens if you do nothing, right? You can lose the reputation of your company. So typically what happens when you lose reputation, you have to rebrand. And rebranding is expensive. Do y'all remember Sierra Mist, the drink? It no longer exists. It's Starry now. Why? Because they lost the licensing. Not because they did anything wrong, but they just lost the licensing. And they harassed what are they called? An influencer. And she was like, nah, and then she took it. But anyways, I digress. That probably cost them millions and millions of dollars. So again, there's the legal consideration of you could get sued, especially if there's a private right of action on any of these laws. That means that human beings can come in and say, hey, you misused my information because of a data breach, whatever, and then they can sue you. And then you also have the compliance with the different regulations. So what they don't tell you about regulators is that regulators like to bring in their friends. So not only will they come in and say, show me all your evidence, show me all your data, they're going to comb through it and be like, hey, guess what? Guess what? They're going to call their friends and be like, hey, FCC, guess what these people are doing? Here, let me show you this evidence. And then they will share that. And so now you got two regulators coming in. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to go stateside and be like, hey, AG, guess what? Guess what? Come check out what they're doing. So what that does is then you're continuously giving more evidence, finding other problems that you may or may not have, right? And then they will continue to meet with you. They'll meet with you quarterly, and they will continue to ask for evidence that you did the thing you were supposed to be doing already and that you can prove that you've done the thing. Sometimes you have to hire outside companies to come in and help you prove that you are doing what you're doing. So I didn't want to leave you all without resources, so here are some websites of some great resources. So just making sure that, again, these are free. You can use ISO standards, but they do cost the monies, so it's all the same stuff. NIST does a great job of creating crosswalks between the different frameworks, so you can see if we're already following maybe like their privacy and security framework, what controls are already available on the AI side, so then you don't have to do double work. And then IAPP is an organization for privacy professionals. ISACA is for like auditing and controls. So they have lots of great articles and resources on different ways that you can keep up with the laws. And then also like ISACA does a really good job about explaining like auditing. So if you know what auditors are gonna come in and look for, like it's a lot easier to either put a rug over what you're trying to hide or in some instances, I've heard some people break things when they know like OSHA's coming in, they'll break like a clock or something so that OSHA focuses on that and they ignore the other things. So not saying do that, I'm saying you have free will, do what you want. I hope you do the right and ethical thing. Ethics! Yay! Questions?
How likely am I as like a small-time developer to be audited by regulators or anything like that? Or is that once something heavy screws up, then they come in?
It's typically when something heavy screws up. So for the most part, a lot of these laws and regulations have a caveat for like small business. So if you're making like, I think it's like less than, was it 10 million, Jen, a year or something? Like there's like.
It depends on what state it is.
True that. So yeah, so depending on like the volume of it. So a lot of times when they're looking at laws, especially like with EU laws, it's like the amount of harm or the type of sensitivity of the personal data. So for the most part, if you're just doing something yourself with like an open data set, then you're probably not going to cause as much harm. So you're probably good.
You touch one person from the EU's data.
Yeah.
You have to start following it. The states have limitations before it starts. Of course, they didn't use the small business standards that we already have in place to define a small business, but that's neither.
So what you were presenting on is essentially how do you build the regulatory structure for a company so that they can make sure that all their AI stuff is in line with what they should be doing?
Yes, how to bring it in, and so then that way it's not like you're not feeling overwhelmed of like, okay, let me go ahead and do this whole thing. It's like, okay, well, what do you already have? What can you build off of? And you know.
So then my question goes back to that screen where you started showing us individual like areas to look at.
All the tiny words, yeah.
So on here, like let's just say you're a small business and you want to implement, we're talking about vibe coding today. And you're not going to impact the data. You just want to use the AI so that your developers can be faster. Where in all of this yellow mess or sea would that, where would you need to note it so that you're on the uppity up and that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on that one, that would definitely go on your AI inventory first, right? Listed there, and then you would add, the caveat of like it's not touching like human data. So you would have a data classification there of saying like, okay, we're only using internal data, and it's helped to train our coders, right? And then you may want like AI contract language with that, depending on how you received it, right? If it's open source, then it's like, okay, do they have access to what we're doing? Is ours going back and training? Like what we do, does it go back and actually train them? Like those are considerations you want to know, is our code exposed? So those are things you want to actually have in the contract. And then you definitely want to make sure you at least have like AI experts on that as well to make sure that they're keeping up with it and that it's being used. And your champions, you want to make sure your developers are using it and that they actually like it, right? And so give a couple of t-shirts to them, maybe a mouse pad,
So then really you're just noting who's using it, who is making sure to do audits, like that kind of language, so that in the case that you are audited, you have all this stuff that you can bring out and you say, hey, we've already considered these options.
Right. Yep. Because you're also talking about like implementation, testing, monitoring, and decommissioning, right? So that's all documentation you should have regardless of whether or not your tool has AI in it, right? Or
is that the previous slide or the previous third
So
slide?
this is like the purple guy right here. So like you should already be doing it.
Right.
Or ideally you should already be doing it. You're just adding on the caveat of AI. So these are things like auditors would ask you, like, do you already have this documentation with you?
I was going to add to that, though. I think you do have to think like an auditor when you're starting off. And I know sometimes both on business and tech, that comes a later thought, right? But if you think about it ahead of time, and this is, in the tech world, the KT is exactly, this is the business side kind of view of it. On the tech side is that KT, who's using it, even if it's open source, but at least list it. And then that way, if they do come in and look at it, you've already got a subset of where you're at. They can dig into further questions if they want, but at least you give them a guide of where you're leading them to what you're doing, not misleading them in any way necessarily, but always looking at the questions that they ask you directly.
Yeah.
So then how does this like implementation deal with SOC 2 compliance if you were trying to, create that security standard?
Very good question. Okay, so, sorry, I nerd out on this stuff. Okay, so this kind of goes back into your implementation and testing. So SOC 2 really takes a look at like, okay, what controls have you been putting in from a security standpoint, right? Like what safeguards do you have around your AI, right? Not just like what is the AI sending out, but also what is it taking in and consuming. And then you're talking about like access level controls, and then you're also talking about the auditing portion of this, right? So not just internal audit, but like the flow that you're going into for reviewing and managing it. And then you're also talking about like what kind of contracts do you have? So if you're looking at it from the stance of, okay, we're using like these 3 different AI tools, right? We're gonna mush them together and we're gonna see like what comes out of it, right? Because all of them need to integrate and work together. Then you're talking about like, okay, the communication between them, like how is that being controlled? And the communication going out from each of them, is that being controlled? Because say only one of them has siloed access to PII or personally identifiable information, but then the other 2 have access to it like inherently through that, right? So those are different components that you have in there. And then also, I didn't talk at all about bias or like what kind of like, or I kind of touched on it, like the risk of the AI model itself. So then are you having a third party coming in and auditing your data set and the training data as well as like the output data, like does it have any bias? You know, how much is it deviating from its intended purpose?
So then if you're not building out models, how does it simplify all of this? Like you're just using an AI product off the shelf.
Right, so that goes back to kind of the, like you adopted a puppy, right? So like there's a lot less work when you adopt a puppy versus like you have a whole child that you need to raise and take care of.
Right.
So that goes back into, it's gonna just go into your AI inventory, your deployment's gonna look different,
Okay,
right? You're still
sorry.
gonna have your vendor risk management portion of that. You're still gonna be asking assessments. Typically with vendors, you ask the 200 sets of questions. If any of you have ever had to work with a vendor, try and get to the vendor, you're asking them questions of like, okay, how long do you have my data? Is my data training your data? Like, how do you actually delete it? How do you know that it's been deleted? What kind of evidence can you provide to me, right? And then are you in trouble if there is a data breach? Or am I in trouble if there's data breach? And who's paying for that? Jen?
I would just add on the decision-making of doing nothing, the regulators will still consider that a decision you have made. So doing nothing is the same as doing something, so it's better to just do something.
Very true, and I know that there aren't many AI laws right now, and it's really hard to pass AI laws. So for example, on the privacy law we tried to pass for Arkansas, we were not able, they hated the AI portion of it. Like that was like what they harped on the most of like, why do I have to be responsible for AI? It's like, because you should be. You should already be doing these things. And so what's happening is a lot of other laws are kind of coming in to govern on top of AI. So if you're talking about, no, pointing to the wrong people, my bad, y'all. So talking about copyright with images and all of that, like what does that look like? You know, they're using copyright law there to kind of help protect against it and like deepfakes, and then you're using patent law to make sure that people aren't just getting credit for computer-based ideas. And then you also see like HIPAA coming in and saying like automated decision-making and how does that impact like human beings regarding their health information. So fun things like that all come up. So I have gone over. Y'all are so patient, and I know you're hungry. So any more questions? If not, you can find me on the LinkedIn. I exist out there. So I'm the first one that comes up with do QAMAR because I'm that cool. But thank you all. Appreciate your time.